The African savanna stretched endlessly beneath a burning orange sky. The wind whispered through the tall golden grass, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain. The land was alive with movement. Gazelles grazing cautiously, elephants marching toward the watering hole, and somewhere in the distance, the deep, guttural roar of a lion echoed across the plains. Ethan Carter, a retired wildlife photographer, wiped the sweat from his brow as he trekked through the wild terrain. His boots crunched against the dry ground, and he adjusted the strap of his old leather satchel, filled with his camera and notebooks. He had spent the last 5 years living in a remote cabin on the outskirts of the Masai Mara, documenting the lives of Africa's most majestic creatures. He had seen nature in its rawest form, life, death, and everything in between. But today felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet that sent a ripple of unease through him. Then he saw them. A thick swarm of vultures circled in the distance, their black silhouettes ominous against the golden sky. Ethan's stomach clenched. He had seen this sight countless times before. It meant something was dying or already dead. His instincts kicked in, and he quickened his pace, pushing through the grass, his pulse hammering against his ribs. As he neared the riverbank, he spotted the source of the vulture's interest. A lion, a massive male, lay sprawled on the cracked earth, his golden mane tangled with dirt and blood. His muscular body was marred with deep, savage wounds, his ribs painfully visible beneath his tawny fur. Flies buzzed around him, landing on the dried blood crusted along his flank. His breathing was ragged, his once powerful frame now reduced to a frail shelled king he had once been. Ethan's heart twisted. He had photographed this lion before. He recognized the proud curve of his jaw, the unique black-tipped tuft of his tail. This was no ordinary lion. This was Leo, one of the most dominant males in the region, a beast who had ruled over a vast territory for years. And now he was dying. Ethan hesitated. Getting close to an injured lion was reckless, maybe even suicidal. Even in this weakened state, a single swipe of those massive paws could rip him apart. But as he studied Leo's dull, pain-filled eyes, he saw something unexpected. Not rage, not fear, a silent plea. The vultures hopped closer, their beady eyes locked on the dying beast. One of them flapped its wings, inching forward, testing the waters. No, Ethan took a step forward, his voice firm. Get away from him. The vultures hesitated, startled by the human's presence. Ethan grabbed a rock and hurled it, sending them scattering into the air with angry squawks. But they wouldn't stay away for long. Kneeling beside Leo, Ethan's fingers hovered over the deep wounds along his side. The claw marks were brutal, likely from another male lion, a battle for dominance. Leo must have lost. Badly. His body was dehydrated, his breathing shallow. He wouldn't last much longer. Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew he shouldn't interfere. This was a natural order of things. The wild had no mercy. But damn it, he couldn't just walk away. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small water bottle. With careful hands, he poured a small trickle of water onto his palm and brought it to Leo's cracked lips. "Come on, buddy," he murmured. "Drink." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Leo's rough tongue flicked against Ethan's palm, weakly lapping at the water. A spark of hope ignited in Ethan's chest. He poured more water, letting Leo drink slowly. He knew it wasn't enough to save him, but it was a start. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and purple. The temperature dropped, the cool breeze whispering through the grass. Ethan knew he had to make a decision. Leave Leo to die or do the unthinkable. His cabin wasn't far. If he could somehow get Leo there, treat his wounds, maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. Ethan exhaled. This was crazy, but he had made his choice. "All right, big guy," he muttered, standing up. "Let's get you out of here." Leo's eyes flickered open, watching Ethan with something that almost looked like understanding. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter found himself making a deal with a lion. Ethan Carter had always been a man of instinct. Years of photographing wildlife had sharpened his senses, taught him the unspoken language of the wild. But this was something different. He wasn't just observing nature's raw reality anymore. He was trying to change it, and that was dangerous. The sky had darkened by the time Ethan stood over the massive, injured lion. Leo's breathing was slow, each rise and fall of his ribcage a battle of its own. The lion was fighting to live, but time was slipping away. Ethan crouched beside him, feeling the heat radiate off the beast's battered body. The wounds, deep gashes along his side and legs, looked fresh but already infected. Flies hovered greedily, buzzing in his ears. "You're tougher than you look, buddy," Ethan murmured. "But we need to get you somewhere safe." Leo barely moved. Only his amber eyes, dull yet still fierce, flickered toward Ethan. Ethan had dealt with injured animals before, but nothing like this. A full-grown lion? The sheer weight of Leo made it nearly impossible to move him alone. But Ethan had to try. He ran back to his small, old truck parked half a mile away, heart pounding. He kept supplies in the back, old blankets, ropes, a medical kit. He grabbed everything he could carry, stuffing bandages and antiseptics into his satchel before running back to the lion. The savannah at night was an entirely different world. Shadows stretched long across the golden plains. The distant howls of hyenas echoed, and far off, a lion's roar trembled through the air. Ethan swallowed hard. If other lions were nearby, Leo was in more danger than he realized. When he reached the lion again, he didn't waste time. He spread the blankets on the ground beside Leo, then carefully grabbed beneath his massive shoulders, trying to roll him onto the fabric. The second he applied pressure, a low, guttural growl rumbled from Leo's throat. Ethan froze. The lion's amber eyes locked onto him, filled with a mix of pain and warning. A fully healthy lion would have killed him in seconds, but Leo was too weak to attack. Still, the message was clear. "Touch me, and you might regret it." Ethan exhaled. "Look, big guy, I know you're not exactly loving this, but I'm not leaving you here. So if you could just not eat me, that'd be great." Leo let out a heavy breath, his eyes blinking slowly. Ethan took it as permission. With careful movements, he worked his arms under the lion's massive frame. Leo let out a weak grunt, but didn't resist. It took every ounce of strength Ethan had to roll him onto the blanket. His muscles screamed in protest, sweat dripping from his forehead. Once Leo was on the makeshift stretcher, Ethan grabbed the ends of the blanket and started dragging. The journey back to the truck was agonizing. Every few feet, Ethan had to stop, panting, his arms shaking. The uneven ground made it worse, but he pushed forward. Halfway there, the distant laugh of a hyena sent a chill down his spine. Hyenas could smell weakness. Ethan turned his head. A pair of glowing eyes flickered in the darkness. A single hyena, watching from a distance. It was alone for now. "Not tonight," Ethan muttered under his breath. He picked up the pace, gritting his teeth as he dragged Leo inch by inch. His muscles burned, his legs threatened to give out, but he refused to stop. By the time he reached the truck, he was drenched in sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hyena had followed, lurking at the edge of the tall grass. With a final burst of strength, Ethan propped open the truck's tailgate and hoisted Leo's front legs onto the edge. "Come on, big guy," he grunted. "Help me out here." Leo let out a low, weary rumble but remained motionless. Ethan dug deep, summoning every ounce of strength left in his body. With a roar of effort, he lifted the lion's back legs and shoved him into the truck bed. Leo collapsed onto blankets, his chest rising and falling in exhaustion. Ethan slammed the tailgate shut and turned, locking eyes with the hyena. It stared at him, ears twitching, before slinking back into the night. Ethan let out a breath of relief. "Yeah, that's what I thought." His body ached, but he didn't waste time. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and hit the gas. The truck rumbled forward, bouncing over the rough terrain as Ethan drove towards his cabin. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Leo was still breathing, his eyes half closed, his body rising and falling slowly. "You're going to be okay," Ethan murmured. But he wasn't sure he was saying it for Leo or for himself. By the time he reached the cabin, exhaustion had set in, but there was no time to rest. The moment he parked, he ran inside, grabbing everything he needed: clean water, towels, more medical supplies. Then, carefully, he lowered the truck's tailgate and began the brutal task of getting Leo inside. It was easier said than done. The lion barely moved as Ethan dragged him toward the cabin, step by step. When they finally made it to the porch, Ethan collapsed onto his knees, gasping for breath. His vision blurred for a second, his body screaming in protest. But then, he turned his head and saw Leo watching him. And in that moment, something changed. Ethan wasn't just looking at a lion. He was looking at a survivor. Leo had fought to stay alive. Now it was Ethan's turn to fight for him. For the next few hours, Ethan worked tirelessly. He cleaned the wounds, pouring water over the dried blood, carefully applying antiseptic. Leo flinched but didn't resist. Ethan's hand shook as he stitched up the worst wounds. It wasn't perfect, he wasn't a vet, but it would have to do. Then, he filled a bowl with water and placed it near Leo's head. The lion stared at it for a moment before slowly lowering his massive tongue to drink. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. "That's it, buddy. You're gonna be all right." Leo rumbled softly, and for the first time, Ethan felt something strange. A connection, not just between man and beast. Something deeper, something unspoken. Outside, the wind howled. The world was still dangerous, still ruthless. But inside the small cabin, for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter had found something worth fighting for, and he wasn't about to lose it. Ethan Carter barely slept that night. The sound of Leo's ragged breathing filled the cabin, each breath shallow and uncertain. Ethan sat on the floor next to him, arms resting on his knees, eyes heavy with exhaustion. He had done all he could for now. Cleaned the wounds, stopped the bleeding, and made sure Leo had water. But he knew the real battle was only just beginning. The cabin was small and rugged, built from weathered wood, and filled with remnants of Ethan's past. Shelves lined with old wildlife books, stacks of photographs from his days as a nature photographer, and a radio that hadn't worked in years. His world had once been about capturing life through a lens. Now, he was fighting to save one. The flickering lantern cast long shadows across the room. Leo lay stretched out on a pile of blankets, his body rising and falling in weak, uneven motions. His wounds were deep, some still oozing, his strength nearly drained. Ethan sighed, rubbing his tired face. He had no medical training beyond basic first aid, and he certainly wasn't a vet. But walking away hadn't been an option. "Just hang in there, big guy," Ethan murmured, running a hand through his messy hair. Leo's ear flicked, acknowledging his presence, but he didn't move otherwise. Ethan exhaled and stood up, stretching his sore muscles. He walked over to the small wooden table, where his medical supplies were laid out. A half-empty bottle of antiseptic, makeshift bandages torn from an old shirt, and a roll of thread he had used for stitching. It wasn't enough. The lion needed proper treatment, antibiotics, real care. If infection set in, all of Ethan's efforts would mean nothing. His mind raced. The nearest village was miles away, and the closest wildlife rescue center even farther. But there was someone, Dr. Aisha Patel, a veterinarian who worked with wildlife conservation teams in the area. Ethan had met her a few times when she came to check on injured animals. She was skilled, passionate, and, most importantly, she wouldn't ask too many questions. Ethan grabbed his phone from the table. No signal. "Damn it," he muttered. He needed to reach her, but he couldn't leave Leo alone. If scavengers caught wind of his weakened state, they'd come for him. Ethan ran a hand through his stubble. Thank Carter. Finally, an idea struck him. Ethan stepped outside into the cool night air. The savannah stretched endlessly before him, bathed in silver moonlight. The distant sounds of crickets and nocturnal predators hummed in the background. He walked over to his old truck and climbed inside, switching on the radio. The static crackled loudly, filling the silence. Come on. He twisted the dial, searching for the emergency frequency used by local rangers and conservationists. After a few moments, a faint voice came through. "Repeat, any units in the area, respond." Ethan leaned forward. "This is Ethan Carter. I need urgent assistance. Is anyone receiving this?" Silence. Then, "Ethan?" A female voice came through, slightly distorted. "Is that you?" Ethan's heart leaped. Aisha, yes, it's me. I need your help. It's urgent. A pause. Then, what's going on? Ethan hesitated. I have an injured lion. He's in bad shape. Deep wounds, possible infection. I don't have the right supplies. A longer silence. Ethan, Aisha's voice was cautious. What do you mean you have an injured lion? Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. I found him dying near the river. He's one of the dominant males in the area. Leo. He lost a fight. Got torn up bad. I couldn't leave him. Aisha muttered something under her breath. You brought a wild lion into your cabin? I didn't have a choice. Another pause. Then a sigh. Where are you? Same place. My cabin near the eastern ridge. I'll be there by morning, she said. Don't do anything stupid. Ethan smirked despite himself. Too late for that. The radio clicked off. Relief washed over him. Help was coming. Ethan returned inside and checked on Leo. The lion hadn't moved much, though his breathing seemed a little steadier. Ethan knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on his massive paw. Help's on the way, buddy. Leo didn't react, but Ethan could sense he was still fighting. Ethan settled onto the floor beside him. The exhaustion was unbearable, his body aching from the struggle of dragging the massive beast. But he refused to leave Leo's side. The night stretched on, endless and heavy. At some point, Ethan dozed off, his head resting against a wooden wall. He dreamt of roaring lions in golden plains. And somewhere in the darkness, Leo dreamed too. The sound of an approaching vehicle jolted Ethan awake. He groggily sat up, his muscles stiff and sore. Morning light filtered through the small cabin windows, casting a warm glow over the room. He blinked a few times before remembering Aisha. He stumbled his feet and rushed outside just as a dusty Jeep pulled up. Aisha Patel stepped out, dressed in her usual khaki gear, her dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She was a woman of sharp eyes and sharper words, and the expression on her face said she was already unimpressed. You look like hell, she commented, grabbing her medical bag. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Nice to see you too. She walked past him and entered the cabin. The moment her eyes landed on Leo, she stopped. Oh, wow. Her voice softened. She knelt beside the lion, carefully examining him. Ethan watched as she worked with precise, gentle hands, checking the wounds, feeling for fever, monitoring his breathing. He's bad, but not beyond saving, she muttered. You're lucky you called me when you did. Ethan exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Can you save him? He asked quietly. Aisha looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something unreadable in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted, but we're going to try. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the savannah, streaking through the thin curtains of Ethan's small cabin. The soft chirping of birds filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, but inside, the air was heavy, thick with the weight of life hanging by a thread. Leo's labored breathing echoed through the quiet space. His massive body stretched across the blankets, his golden mane matted with blood and sweat. Every shallow breath was a battle, his once mighty chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed tightly against his chest. His eyes flicked between Leo and Aisha Patel, who worked silently beside the lion. Aisha's hands moved with steady precision, her dark brows furrowed in concentration. She wiped away dried blood with damp cloths, carefully redressing the wounds Ethan had stitched the night before. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, burning sharp against the earthy scent of the cabin. How bad is it? Ethan finally asked, his voice hoarse. Aisha didn't look up. Bad, but not hopeless. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. The infection's already setting in, Aisha continued. His wounds are deep, some from claws, others from teeth. He's dehydrated and there's a high risk of sepsis. She paused, glancing at Ethan. Honestly, I'm surprised he's still alive. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at Leo, the broken king. Even in his weakest state, there was still something regal about him, a quiet pride buried beneath the pain. He's a fighter, Ethan murmured. Aisha's eyes softened. That's the only reason he's still breathing. She reached into her medical bag, pulling out a small vial of antibiotics and a syringe. Ethan's stomach twisted. What's that? Penicillin. It's his only shot at beating the infection. Ethan watched as she filled the syringe, the liquid glistening inside. Will it hurt him? Aisha's eyes flicked toward him, surprised by the question. Everything I'm doing hurts him, Ethan. But if I don't, he'll die. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Aisha knelt beside Leo, placing a gentle hand on his massive shoulder. Easy, big guy, she whispered. Then, with practiced precision, she slid the needle into the thick muscle near Leo's hind leg. Leo flinched, his amber eyes flickering open, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Ethan instinctively took a step forward, his heart pounding. Sure, it's okay, he murmured, his voice soft. She's helping you. To his surprise, Leo's growl faded. His glazed eyes locked onto Ethan, something flickering behind them. Trust. A lump rose in Ethan's throat. Aisha glanced up, her brow lifting slightly. He listens to you, she murmured. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the lion. I think he knows I'm not going to hurt him. Aisha sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. That's rare, she said quietly. Lions don't trust humans, especially not when they're vulnerable. Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't explain the connection he felt, the unspoken bond forming between man and beast. It made no sense, but it was real. The next few days blurred into a fragile rhythm. Ethan and Aisha worked side by side, tending to Leo's wounds, forcing water into his mouth, and monitoring his fever. The lion's condition teetered between life and death. One moment steady, the next slipping away. Every sunrise felt like borrowed time. Ethan barely left cabin, refusing to let Leo out of sight. He sat for hours beside the lion, speaking to him in low, soothing tones, telling him stories of the wild, of the life that still waited for him beyond these walls. And somehow, Leo listened. He's stronger than I thought, Aisha admitted one evening as they sat by the small fire outside the cabin. The night air was cool, the sky a blanket of stars stretched above them. He's not giving up. Ethan stared into the flames, his fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Neither am I. Aisha glanced at him, her dark eyes searching his face. You know this isn't how nature works, right? She said softly. Ethan's jaw clenched. I don't care. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Aisha sighed, shaking her head. You always were the stubborn one. Ethan smirked faintly, his eyes still fixed on the fire. Guess some things never change. On the fifth morning, the first sign of hope arrived. Ethan woke to the sound of soft, rhythmic lapping. His heart jolted as he turned. Leo was drinking from the bowl of water by his head. Not just a few sips. He was drinking. Ethan shot to his feet, barely believing what he was seeing. Aisha, he called, his voice cracking. She rushed in from outside, eyes wide. When she saw Leo, her lips parted in shock. Oh my God, he's rallying. Ethan's heart pounded as he crouched beside the lion. That's it, buddy, he whispered. Come on, fight. Leo's amber eyes flicked toward him, still glassy, but sharper than before. A spark, a flicker of life. Aisha knelt beside them, her voice low with wonder. He's choosing to live. Ethan's throat tightened. He reached out, running his hand gently through the thick, tangled mane. I told you, big guy, I'm not giving up on you. But hope was a fragile thing in the wild. By nightfall, the sound of distant gunshots echoed across the plains, sharp cracks splitting the silence. Ethan stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Poachers. They were getting closer. Aisha's face darkened as she stood by the window. They've been more active lately. Rumors of a new group moving through the area. Ethan's hands curled into fists. They're after the lions. Aisha nodded grimly. If they find them like this, they'll finish what nature couldn't. Ethan's heart pounded harder. He glanced back at Leo, who lay sleeping, his massive body rising and falling in steady rhythm. He had come too far to lose him now. A fire ignited in Ethan's chest, hot and fierce. I won't let that happen. Aisha's eyes flicked toward him, something wary in her gaze. "You're not thinking of—" "Yes, I am." "Ethan, this isn't your fight." Ethan's jaw clenched. "It is now." He glanced at Leo, at the scarred king who had defied death, who had trusted him when no other creature would. They had both been broken once, but some battles were worth fighting, even against the odds. The night was thick with tension. Ethan stood on the small porch of his cabin, staring into the vast darkness beyond. The distant cracks of gunfire had faded, but the weight of them still hung heavy in the air. His hands rested on the railing, his fingers gripping the worn so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind him, Leo lay in the dim glow of the lantern, his breathing steadier than before. He was getting stronger, but strength wouldn't be enough if the wrong people found him. Aisha's voice broke the silence. "We have to move him." Ethan turned to find her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, worry lining her face. "We can't," he said firmly. "He's still too weak." Aisha sighed, stepping forward. "If the poachers come through here and find a wounded lion, an easy target. Do you really think they'll hesitate?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. The poachers weren't just trophy hunters. They were part of a growing black market ring, killing lions not for sport, but for profit, bones, skins, and anything they could sell to the highest bidder. A weak, injured lion was nothing more than a payday to them. "We need a plan," Aisha pressed. "Something now." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling under his skin. His mind raced. They couldn't take Leo far, not in his condition. But leaving him here? That was signing his death warrant. Then an idea struck. "There's a cave," Ethan said suddenly. Aisha frowned. "A cave?" "Yeah, about 3 miles west of here. It's hidden in the brush, near the base of the Rocky Hills. I used to take shelter there when I was out tracking in bad weather." Aisha considered it, then nodded slowly. It could work. It'd keep him out of sight. But how the hell do we get a 400-pound lion there? Ethan glanced at Leo, who lay quietly, his ears twitching as he listened. "We carry him." Aisha snorted. "Oh, sure. Let's just throw him over our shoulders and go for a nice jog." Ethan gave her a pointed look. "I have a cart in the back. It's old, but it has wheels. If we can get Leo onto it, we can pull him there." Aisha exhaled. "That's risky. If we run into trouble, then we deal with it." Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Aisha nodded. "All right, let's do it." Getting Leo onto the cart was the first challenge. The lion was massive, even in his weakened state. Every time they tried to lift him, he let out a deep, warning growl, not aggressive, but cautious. "He's not sure what we're doing," Aisha murmured, wiping sweat from her brow. "He's scared." Ethan crouched beside Leo, placing a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "We're getting you somewhere safe," he whispered. "I need you to trust me." Leo's golden eyes flickered in the dim lantern light. Then, after a moment, he went still. Ethan took a shaky breath. "Okay, let's try again." With careful movements, they slid a makeshift stretcher beneath him, using an old tarp and wooden planks for support. Slowly, painstakingly, they lifted. Leo grunted, shifting slightly, but didn't fight them. Aisha let out a breath of relief. "He's letting us do this." It took all their strength, but finally, they maneuvered him onto the cart. His massive body barely fit, his tail hanging slightly over the edge. Ethan straightened, his muscles burning. "All right, let's move." The night was eerily silent as they made their way west. Ethan and Aisha pulled the cart slowly over uneven ground, the wheels creaking under the weight. Every now and then, Leo let out a soft, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, more of a questioning hum. "We're almost there, buddy," Ethan muttered. The savannah stretched wide and endless around them. The moon cast long shadows, turning trees into looming figures. Every crunch of dry grass beneath their feet felt deafening in the stillness. Then Aisha froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan's pulse spiked. A faint rustling came from the brush ahead, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Ethan reached for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. "Stay behind me," Aisha grabbed a flashlight from her bag, flicking it on. A beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on a pair of glowing yellow eyes. For a split second, Ethan's heart stopped. Then movement. The creature stepped into the light, revealing itself. Another lion. Aisha gasped softly. It was a female, her tawny coat sleek and powerful. Her ears were pricked forward, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. She wasn't attacking. She was curious. Ethan swallowed. "Stay still," he whispered. The lioness took another step forward. Her eyes locked onto the cart, onto Leo. Recognition flickered in her gaze. Aisha's breath hitched. Ethan, she knows him. Ethan's mind whirled. Could it be? Leo let out a low, rumbling sound. A greeting. The lioness responded, a soft, questioning huff. She took another step closer, her muscles tense but not hostile. Ethan's throat went dry. Was this his mate? Leo let out a weak but determined growl. The lioness closed the distance in an instant. Aisha grabbed Ethan's arm in panic, but the lioness didn't attack. Instead, she rubbed her massive head against Leo's. A low, throaty sound rumbled between them. A reunion. Ethan let out a slow breath. Holy hell. Aisha wiped at her eyes. She's been looking for him. Ethan's chest ached. For days, Leo had been fighting alone. But now, against all odds, he wasn't alone anymore. The lioness lingered beside him, her tail flicking in quiet protectiveness. And for the first time in days, Leo's golden eyes burned with something new. Strength, determination, a reason to keep fighting. Ethan and Aisha exchanged a look. We have to move, Ethan whispered. Now. Aisha nodded. With renewed urgency, they continued toward the cave. But now, they weren't alone. The lioness padded beside them, watching over a fallen king. The wild was not yet finished with Leo, and neither was he. The journey to the cave was no longer just about survival. It was about something more, something primal. Leo, the wounded king, had found an unexpected guardian in the form of the lioness. She walked beside the cart like a silent sentinel, her golden eyes sharp in the moonlight. Aisha glanced at Ethan. She won't leave him, she murmured. Ethan nodded, his hands gripping the cart's handles. She must be part of his pride. Aisha frowned, or what's left of it. The thought settled like a heavy stone in Ethan's gut. What if the other lions were gone? Slaughtered by the same poachers who had nearly killed Leo? His jaw tightened. They needed to hurry. The wheels of the cart groaned as they navigated the rocky terrain. Sweat dripped down Ethan's back, but he didn't stop. They were close now. So close. Then, a snap in the distance. Aisha froze. Did you hear that? Ethan's hand went to his knife. Something was out there. The lioness's ears flicked. A deep growl rumbled for her throat. She had heard it too. Ethan's stomach clenched. We need to move. Now. They quickened their pace, their breaths heavy in the still night. The cave was just beyond the next hill. If they could just... A gunshot split the air. Leo flinched. The lioness snarled. Ethan's blood turned to ice. They'd been found. Go! Ethan shouted. Aisha grabbed the front of the cart, pulling with everything she had. Ethan pushed from behind, his legs burning. The lioness let out a ferocious roar, spinning toward the sound. She was protecting Leo, but against guns? Ethan's mind raced. No, we can't let her fight alone. He twisted, scanning the darkness. Then movement. Shadows emerged from the brush. Man, armed. There! The male! One of them shouted. Another gunshot rang out. Too close. The lioness charged. Ethan barely had time to react before she was upon them. A streak of muscle and fury. One of the men cried out as the lioness slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Screams. Snarls. A struggle. Ethan gritted his teeth. They had to keep moving. The cave was just ahead. He could see the dark opening, a sanctuary hidden in the hills. But they weren't safe yet. Aisha was struggling to push the cart faster. Ethan grabbed her arm. Run. I'll get Leo inside. Aisha hesitated, then nodded. taking off toward the cave. Ethan turned back, his heart pounding. He grabbed the cart, shoving it with everything he had, straining, pushing, willing himself forward. Leo let out a weak growl. His amber eyes locked onto Ethan's. "Hold on, big guy." He could hear the fight raging behind him, the lioness battling the poachers, their voices filled with panic. But he couldn't look back. He had to get Leo inside. 10 feet. 5. Almost. A gunshot exploded behind him. The lioness's roar turned to a pained yelp. Ethan whipped around just in time to see her stumble. A bullet had torn through her shoulder. "No!" Ethan shouted. The poacher raised his rifle again, aiming to finish her off. Ethan moved without thinking. Before the poacher could fire, Ethan lunged. He tackled the man hard, knocking the gun from his hands. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, rolling through the dirt. The poacher swung wildly, his fist catching Ethan's jaw. Pain exploded through his skull. But Ethan didn't stop. He slammed his elbow into the man's ribs, then grabbed a rock and crack. The poacher went limp. Ethan staggered his feet, his breath ragged. The lioness was struggling to stand, her injured leg trembling beneath her, but she was still alive. Ethan rushed to her side. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're okay." Her golden eyes flickered toward him, filled with pain, but also something else. Something Ethan hadn't expected. Trust. More gunshots in the distance. The other poachers were still out there. Ethan turned. Leo was inside the cave now. Aisha was waving frantically. "Ethan, come on." He wrapped an arm around the lioness's injured side. "Let's go," he whispered. And miraculously, she followed. They reached the cave just as more gunshots rang out. Ethan collapsed against the wall, panting. Aisha grabbed his arm, eyes wide. "We can't stay here." Ethan looked at Leo, at the lioness, at the blood on the ground. No, they couldn't run anymore. They had to fight. He turned to Aisha, voice deadly calm. "How many bullets do we have?" She hesitated, then opened her bag, revealing a pistol with 2 spare magazines. Ethan nodded. It would have to be enough. Outside, footsteps approached. Voices. The poachers were coming. Aisha checked the gun, her hand steady. She glanced at Ethan. No more running? Ethan's lips curled into a grim smile. No more running. Leo let out a low, rumbling growl. Even wounded, weak, and bleeding, he was ready. Ethan gripped the gun, his heart pounding. Let's end this. The cave was silent, too silent. Ethan pressed his back against a stone wall, gripping the pistol tightly. His breath was shallow, his pulse thunderous in his ears. Aisha crouched beside him, her own weapon clutched in steady hands. Across the cave, Leo lay motionless, his amber eyes flickering in the dim light. The lioness, wounded but defiant, stood over him, her ears flattened in warning. Outside, footsteps crunched against the dry earth. The poachers were closing in. Ethan could hear them, low voices muttering orders, the distinct click of rifles being readied. They know we're in here, Aisha whispered. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but they don't know we're waiting for them. Aisha exhaled, tightening her grip. Then let's make them regret coming. A long shadow stretched across the cave entrance. Then a voice. Come out, a gruff, accented tone called. We know you're in there. Ethan recognized it instantly. Klaus, a notorious poacher, the leader of the group, a man Ethan had spent years tracking through reports, never able to catch. Until now, Ethan kept his voice low. We let them step inside. Once they do, we end this. Aisha gave a single nod. No fear, just determination. The lioness let out a low, deep growl. Ethan whispered to her, Not yet, but soon. Leo barely moved, but his golden eyes burned. He was watching, waiting. Then the first poacher stepped inside. The man barely had time to react. Aisha fired first. Bang! The poacher cried out, clutching his shoulder as he crumpled against the rock wall. The gunshot sent chaos rippling through the night. Shouts, footsteps. The other poachers surged forward. Ethan whirled, taking aim. Bang! A second man dropped. The lioness roared, her powerful voice shaking the cave walls. Klaus appeared in the entrance, his rifle raised. His cold eyes landed on Ethan. "I should have known it was you." Ethan's grip tightened on the pistol. "This ends tonight," he said through clenched teeth. Klaus smirked. "Agreed." He fired. Ethan dived. The bullet missed, barely. Aisha fired at Klaus, forcing him to duck. The cave erupted into chaos. Leo let out a weak, guttural growl. His ears flicked, his muscles trembling. He wanted to stand, but he was too weak. The lioness wasn't. With a snarl of pure fury, she launched herself forward. She moved like a shadow, swift, silent, and deadly. Klaus barely had time to react before she was on him. Klaus's scream echoed through the cave as the lioness's jaws clamped around his arm. He fired wildly, but the gunshot missed, embedding into the stone. Ethan lunged forward. He grabbed Klaus's rifle, twisting it free. A single punch sent the poacher sprawling. Klaus hit the ground hard, breathing raggedly. Blood dripped from his wounded arm where the lioness had struck. He looked up at Ethan, eyes filled with rage. "You think you've won," he hissed. "More will come. There's always more." Ethan stared down at him, his jaw tight. "Not tonight." Klaus tried to scramble for his knife. A deep, powerful growl rumbled through the cave. Klaus froze. Leo was standing. The wounded king rose, slowly, painfully, but with purpose. His golden eyes locked onto Klaus. For the first time, the poacher looked afraid. Leo took a step forward, his muscles shaking but his will unbroken. Ethan could see it, the strength, the power, the rage. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was revenge. Leo let out a thunderous roar. Klaus barely had time to scream. The poachers who remained fled. The ones who couldn't run lay wounded or unconscious. Klaus, the monster who had hunted the lion for years, was no more. The cave fell silent. Ethan's heart raced. He looked at Leo, the lion who should have died but didn't. The king had survived. Aisha let out a shaky breath. "We did it." Ethan nodded, glancing at the lioness. Her body trembled, her wound still bleeding. "We need to get her help," Aisha said softly. Ethan turned to Leo. "And him." The lion blinked slowly. Then, as if understanding, he lay back down, not in defeat, but in victory. The hunt was over, and for the first time in years, the king of the wild was free. The cave was eerily silent now. The echoes of the battle still lingered in the air. The smell of gunpowder, the faint groans of wounded men outside, and the deep, rumbling breath of Leo, the king of the wild. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the sting of exhaustion in his bones. His knuckles ached from the fight, his chest rising and falling in rapid bursts as he processed what had just happened. Klaus was gone. The poachers had been defeated, but the real battle was not over. Leo, though victorious, was still gravely wounded. His once proud golden mane was streaked with blood, his powerful frame trembling from pain. The lioness, too, was barely standing, her injured leg buckling beneath her weight. Ethan knelt beside them. "Stay with me, big guy," he murmured, pressing a gentle hand against Leo's side. The lion's amber eyes flickered toward him, full of understanding. Aisha crouched beside Ethan, her expression etched with concern. "We need to get them to safety," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "But where?" Aisha bit her lip, deep in thought. "There's an old wildlife rehabilitation center about 20 miles from here. It's abandoned now, but I know a vet in the next town who might still have connections." Ethan's mind raced. 20 miles. In Leo's current condition, he might not make it. And then there was a bigger issue. The poachers. They might have won this battle, but Klaus was right about one thing. More would come. "We need to move," Ethan said firmly. "Now." Aisha nodded and grabbed their supplies. Ethan turned back to Leo, placing a hand on the lioness's shoulder. "We're not leaving you behind," he said softly. "Not after everything." The lioness blinked. Her trust solidified. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt something unspoken pass between them. A bond, a promise. They would protect each other, no matter what. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher out of broken wood. from the cart and thick vines. It wasn't perfect, but it would help to move Leo without worsening his injuries. The lioness refused to leave his side. The sun was beginning to rise as they set off. Ethan and Aisha took turns pulling the stretcher while the lioness walked beside them, her sharp eyes scanning the landscape for danger. Every step was a challenge. Leo let out the occasional low growl of discomfort, but he didn't fight them. He knew they were trying to help. Hours passed. The heat of the savannah became unbearable, and their energy began to fade. But still they pressed on. Ethan kept his ears open for signs of more poachers, but the area seemed deserted. For now. "We need water," Aisha said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Ethan nodded and reached for his canteen. It was almost empty. They needed to find a stream. Fast. And then, as if the universe had heard them, the lioness stopped. Her ears perked up. Then, without warning, she bolted. Ethan and Aisha barely had time to react before she disappeared into the tall grass. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered. Aisha's eyes widened. "Wait! She might be leading us to something." Ethan hesitated. Then, without wasting another second, he followed. Pushing through the grass, Ethan emerged into a clearing, and his breath caught. A small, hidden waterhole lay before him, its crystal-clear water shimmering under the morning sun. The lioness was already drinking, her body visibly relaxing. Aisha let out a laugh of relief. "She saved us." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. She knew. They rushed back to Leo, carefully dragging the stretcher closer. Ethan filled his canteen, then poured some water onto a piece of cloth, gently pressing it to Leo's muzzle. The lion let out a low rumble. Content. Aisha knelt beside them. "He's holding on." Ethan met her gaze. "Then we keep going." They still had miles to cover, but for the first time, it felt like hope was on their side. The journey had become a test of endurance. Every step was a reminder of the danger that lay ahead. The heat of the day was relentless, and the weight of Leo's injury had only worsened since they had left the cave. Despite the makeshift stretcher, it was clear the lion couldn't travel much farther without more help. Aisha and Ethan's bodies ached from the strain, but they didn't speak of it. Not yet. The lioness had been their silent guide, her keen senses leading them through the savannah. When they stumbled upon the hidden waterhole, it was as though the world had opened a door just for them. Yet, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, they couldn't afford to rest for long. "We should reach the wildlife center by nightfall," Aisha said, wiping her forehead and adjusting her pack. Ethan glanced at Leo. The lion's once proud mane was matted with sweat and blood, but his eyes, those amber eyes, still glowed with a fierce spark. Leo wasn't done yet. "Let's hope we make it before dark," Ethan replied, his voice rough. "We're not safe out here. We need to get Leo somewhere secure." They pressed on, the weight of time and danger pressing down on them. The shadows grew longer with each passing minute, but they didn't stop. At last, as dusk began to settle, they saw it, the silhouette of the abandoned Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, barely visible through the trees. It looked like an old stone building, crumbling in places, but it stood solidly against the growing night. "We made it," Aisha whispered, her voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. Ethan gave a weary smile. "We're not done yet." The center was eerily quiet as they approached. Boards covered the windows and the gate was rusted, but the structure itself was mostly intact. The lioness padded ahead, sniffing the air, clearly on alert. Ethan and Aisha carefully set Leo's stretcher down on the ground. "Let's check inside," Ethan said. Aisha nodded, reaching for a crowbar that had been hidden in their supplies. She pried the rusted gate open with a satisfying creak. They entered the center cautiously, each step a reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. The building's interior was as abandoned as it appeared outside. Old medical equipment was scattered across the floor, faded signs hung from the walls, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. There were cages in the back, once used for injured animals, but now they stood empty, rusting away. "What now?" Aisha asked, looking at Ethan for guidance. "We need to make a safe place for Leo and the lioness," he said, surveying the room. "I'll look for something to patch up Leo's wounds. You check the back rooms. See if there's anything useful." Aisha nodded and moved deeper into the building. Ethan turned his attention back to Leo, who lay quietly on the floor, his breathing shallow but steady. The lioness remained close, her eyes never leaving Ethan. He gently cleaned the wound on Leo's side, doing his best to make the big cat comfortable. His wounds were bad, but not life-threatening. Not yet. As Ethan worked, his mind wandered to the dangers that still lurked. The poachers weren't far behind. The feeling of being watched, stalked, hadn't left him since that fateful night. Suddenly, he heard a noise. A sharp crunch echoed from the back of the building. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his gun, moving swiftly toward the source of the sound. Aisha appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Ethan, you need to see this." Ethan followed her, his heart pounding. In the back room, a large metal door stood half open, and a faint light flickered from inside. "This wasn't here before," Aisha said. "It's like a hidden room." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's inside?" Aisha stepped forward, pushing the door open with caution. "I don't know." The light revealed an underground lab, its walls covered in dark, stained sheets of plastic. Tables with tools and wires were scattered everywhere, and in the center of it all was a large containment chamber. It looked like a cage designed for something much larger than the animals they had cared for. Aisha gasped, "What is this place?" Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the lab. On one table lay several syringes and vials, many marked with numbers and strange symbols. His heart sank. "They were experimenting on the animals," he whispered. He turned to Aisha, his mind racing. "I think we've stumbled into something much worse than poachers. This wasn't just about hunting animals. This was research." Aisha looked around, her eyes wide with shock. What were they trying to do? Before Ethan could answer, there was another noise, a low growl. Ethan and Aisha froze. The growl came again, closer this time. "Did you hear that?" Aisha whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his gun. "Get back." The growl echoed through the lab once more. But it wasn't just one animal. There were multiple growls coming from the darkness behind the walls. Then a door creaked open. From the shadows emerged a figure, a man in a lab coat. He was tall, thin, with a wild look in his eyes. His face was gaunt, his skin almost sickly pale. "I was wondering when you'd find this place," he said in a cold, emotionless tone. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" The man grinned. "A survivor of a different kind. You've stumbled into something much bigger than you realize. These lions, your precious Leo, they're just a small part of a larger plan." The man stepped into the light, revealing several cages behind him. Cages holding large, strange animals. "They were my experiments," he said softly. "And now you'll see the true power of what I've created." The man in the lab coat grinned, stepping forward into the dim light of the underground lab. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling madness. Behind him, several large cages stood, their contents shifting in the shadows. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded again, his voice edged with fury. The man didn't flinch. "You wouldn't understand," he said, his voice almost too calm, "but you will see soon enough." Aisha's breath caught. "What is this place? What have you done to these animals?" The man's eyes darkened. "You see, it was never about conservation or saving them. I've been creating the perfect predator. Each animal a piece of the puzzle. The lions, the tigers, even the rhinos, they're all part of my research." Ethan's heart pounded. "You've been experimenting on them?" The man nodded, his face twisted in satisfaction. "Yes, I've altered their genetics, modified their instincts, and created a new breed of super predator. Stronger, faster, smarter than anything you've ever seen. These are the animals that will rule the world." Ethan's stomach churned. The man was insane. "We need to get out of here," Aisha said, her voice shaking. "This place is a nightmare." But before they could make a move, there was a loud growl. The cages rattled. Ethan spun around, his gun raised. "What the hell is that?" The man's grin widened. "You'll see soon enough." The growl grew louder, closer. And then the first creature emerged. It was a massive hybrid, half lion, half something else. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural ferocity. Its body was muscular, and its movements were eerily precise. "It's one of my creations," the man said, almost proudly. "I've given him the strength of a lion, the agility of a cheetah, and the intellect of a human. They can track you, hunt you, and—" Before he could finish, the hybrid lunged. Its claws slashed through the air, but Ethan was ready. He fired his gun, hitting the creature squarely in the chest. It roared in pain, but it didn't stop. "Run!" Ethan shouted to Aisha. The hybrid roared again, charging toward them. Aisha pulled Ethan's arm, dragging him toward the back door. They had to get out. They had to survive. As they ran, more creatures appeared, emerging from the shadows. Tigers with glowing eyes, mutated wolves, and creatures that didn't belong in the wild. "They're everywhere!" Aisha screamed, her voice breaking. Ethan fired again, taking down one of the beasts, but they kept coming. The scientists laughed maniacally from behind them. "You can't escape. You'll die here, and my creations will roam free." Ethan grabbed Aisha's hand. "We're not dying today. We're getting out of here." But just as they reached the door, they heard a familiar, deep growl. Leo, the lion, was standing in the doorway, his golden eyes flashing. The lioness stood beside him, her posture proud, even as she limped. They had come to their rescue. Ethan's heart swelled with hope. "Leo, you're still alive." Leo snarled at the hybrids charging toward them. The lioness roared in response, as if answering the call of battle. Ethan and Aisha stood their ground, watching in awe as the lion and lioness defended them. Leo charged first, his body moving like a force of nature, his claws slashing through the hybrid with ease. The lioness wasn't far behind, and together, they fought like a force of nature, swift, strong, and unstoppable. The scientists screamed in frustration. "No, you can't let them win. They're only animals." But Ethan knew better. Leo and the lioness weren't just animals. They were family. As Leo and the lioness took down the last of the mutated creatures, the building began to collapse. The scientists' laughter stopped, replaced by shouts of panic as the lab structure began to crumble under the weight of their battle. Aisha pulled Ethan toward the exit. "We need to go now." With the last of their strength, Ethan, Aisha, Leo, and the lioness made it out of the building just as the lab exploded, sending a shockwave of dust and debris into the air. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the savannah, looking back only once. The building had been destroyed, and the madness inside it was gone. They had won. As they collapsed onto the soft grass, Ethan took a deep breath. The lions were beside him, alive, free, and victorious. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "We couldn't have done it without you." The lioness let out a soft, contented purr and nuzzled him gently. Leo, though still weakened, stood proudly by his side. The sun set in the distance, casting a warm glow over the savannah. For the first time in days, there was peace. And so, the journey came to a close. The poachers were defeated, the mad scientists' twisted experiments destroyed, and the lions, Leo and the lioness, had their freedom. But this is just one of many incredible stories that we have yet to tell. If you enjoyed this thrilling adventure, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let us know in the comments what you think of Leo's incredible journey, and share this story with your friends who love wild adventures. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales from the wild.